Hello and welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Verrelli, founder and CEO of Project Purple. We have an exciting interview coming up with a special guest after a few quick updates. Since 2010, we've contributed over $4 million and counting to pancreatic cancer research efforts. We've also allocated over $1 million worth of aid to more than 1,500 patients and families through our patient aid programs. Your monthly or one-time gift can improve patients' lives through research and assistance programs. You can donate now at projectpurple.org. Pancreatic cancer does not rest, and neither will we. Your support is truly appreciated. If you're looking to get involved in one of our events, whether that means joining a run team, participating in a virtual run walk, group fitness, golf, or anything else you can think of, visit our website at projectpurple.org/events to learn more. Without further ado, let's meet our special guest today, coming all the way. I always say all the way from Maine, which isn't that far. Well, it depends. I didn't ask you, Mark. We're in Maine. I mean, like, I guess if you were in the northern tip, yeah, that's pretty far. Up by Arcadia or, even further north. If you're in like Portland, which is a great area, southern Maine, I mean, yeah, it's like 3.5, 4 hours. So that's like drivable. But I know like getting up as you get past that Portland, past like the LL Bean store and get Sunday River. Like Sunday River is manageable. Then once you get past that, then it gets a little bit that gets to be a long haul.
And that's where I'm going to be. I'm just half an hour north of Bangor. So we're almost 2.5 hours north of Portland. So it's a little ride to Connecticut.
Little ride to Connecticut. Well, welcome to the Project Purple podcast, pancreatic cancer survivor Mark Wade from Maine. And there used to be, I was having this moment the other night with my wife. We were talking about like commercials, maybe because it was like the Super Bowl and like, commercials are always like the big thing with the Super Bowl, but there used to be that commercial, right? Like that was like good things come from Maine or the saying, right? Like it's like, and there's also like the water and everything, which is true. I mean, Maine, for those that have never been to Maine, is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, the winters are brutal, as we were just talking. But if you like that kind of stuff, it's got some of the best skiing in the entire Northeast.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said earlier, we got 1.5 to 2 inches of snow last night. So I'm ready for spring and it'll be here soon.
Yeah. So we can't wait for spring. Bring on the warm temperatures and the longer days. Well, Mark, thank you for joining us. As we were talking before we hit record, this podcast is about you and your journey with pancreatic cancer. And always the first part of the podcast is really the guest opportunity to kind of share their journey. We hope that your friends and family do listen to this, so they'll know somewhat of the story. But this is really your opportunity to share with our audience, which is vast and comes from all over the world, about yourself and a little bit about your journey with pancreatic cancer. So with that, I'm going to hand the microphone over to you. And as I said, you can stay at 30,000 feet, or we can go down into the weeds. So with that, the microphone is yours.
My name's Mark Wade, and in the fall of 2021, I was diagnosed with stage 2B pancreatic cancer. I hadn't been feeling good, had lost some weight, had a pain in my side, and we did a CAT scan, and they were able to do a pinpoint procedure to check and see if it was cancer or not, and it was. And in December of 21, I had surgery to have a distal pancreatotomy and a splenectomy. There was a 4-centimeter mass on the outside of my pancreas tail and into the vessels that fed my spleen. So we opted to have that procedure. Things did not go great after surgery. I had an ileus. I was in the hospital for a month and a half. Got to say, it was some of the hardest stuff I've ever been through, but I did. I had some great nurses, great doctors, family that called all the time, and right in the middle of COVID, so you couldn't have visitors at the hospital. My wife was able to come for 2 hours every afternoon. It was tough, but I got through that, and then had 6 weeks of radiation starting in April of 22, and then went right into chemo for 6 months. That in the middle of COVID, once again, was a real pain in the butt. If you had a cough, they stopped you at the door. They did not want you to come in. And it all in my, I laugh when I look at it. It went full circle because my surgery was December 1st of 21, and I finished my last day of chemo, December 1st, 2022. And it was good to have it all done. We talked earlier, family makes a big difference. I had a brother and a sister who came to meet me at the cancer center. They wouldn't let them in because of COVID, but we stood outside and celebrated being done with chemo.
It's kind of wild, like, hearing real quick here, like we're not that far off from 21, right? But like we forget, I think like, and we've been doing this podcast for 7 years. So we were doing podcasts during COVID, and this was like the tipping point for us here from some standpoint of realizing like how impactful this was for this community. COVID, that was what you just said, like you're going in by yourself, or you're limited. And so to go through that time frame, but to hear that now, Mark, is just like a little surreal. Like it seems like that's like make believe, and it was like 30 years ago, but it was only 3 years ago. And how far now back as we are back to the pre-COVID experience, which you and I were talking about, my experience with my dad and everything, and like I don't think I could ever envision doing that on my own or being there on my own. So during that time, one of my questions here, just to stay on this topic, was like, what kind of got you through that space? Because I think this is not that hindsight's always 2020, and we don't want to think about this from a negative standpoint, but I think there's lessons to be learned for people who went through that, for people going through it now. Yeah. Like that strength that it took to get through that by yourself. Yeah. So were there things that you would do like mentally, like exercises, or like, how'd you get through it?
In the hospital, like I said, I could have a half a cup of ice chips was all I was allowed after the surgery with the ileus. Anybody who's been through an NG tube knows what that's like. Nobody warned me what that was going to be like. I was not impressed with that. And then the NG tube went in. The next day they came in to put in a PICC line, and I knew it wasn't good when a surgical team comes into my room with all the equipment. They had their hats on and these big machines. And that's what I told the nurse. I says, this isn't going to be good. And she's, what do you mean? I says, you got surgical hats on and you're in my hospital room. But I needed to have nourishment of some kind that get me the TPN to get me through. But like I said, my family called every day while I was in the hospital. Thank goodness for FaceTime. People, laugh at Facebook sometimes. I've got friends who think, oh my gosh, Facebook, blah, blah. FaceTime was the best thing ever because I could see my family. I sent my wife home every afternoon. She would come in from 4 to 6. She was allowed to visit me. I said, as soon as you get home, I need to see the dog. So she would get home here at the house and get the dog and sit. And it was nice to see him. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. So 1 year to the date, pretty much, you go through this journey. Yeah. If we back up, though, like prior to December 21, I know we talked about it, having Lynch syndrome. Did you know that prior to all of this happening?
Yeah. So you and I talked earlier, my dad died from colon cancer back in 82. And so we've all been being tested. I think I started testing at 30 for colon cancer. And my younger sister started looking into why everybody in the family was passing away from cancer, all my dad's relatives. And she found out that we have Lynch syndrome. So we were all tested. I got tested in 2014 and knew I had Lynch syndrome. And just surveillance, you and I talked earlier, people need to be proactive for their health. You've got to push for yourself. I hate to say sometimes the doctors are like, oh, don't worry. Well, if someone in your family had colon cancer or pancreatic cancer, get screened. You've got to be your own activist, because I'm sorry, the doctors, insurance companies aren't going to push you to take care of you. You've got to take care of yourself.
So you find out at 14. So were you in routine surveillance every year of going in?
Colon cancer every 2 years.
5 or
Every
2?
two, because in probably 2008 we found some polyps, and they were taking care of that every 2 years, and then every 4 years doing an endoscopy, and everything looked good. I had an endoscopy in 2021. Everything looked good. Like I said, then I started feeling I was losing a little weight. My side hurt, and we were able to do something about that.
So it's wild, though. I mean, I know you mentioned stage 2B is what they diagnosed you with.
Yeah.
But if you had an EUS, the endoscopic ultrasound in 21, but then diagnosed in December of 21, I mean, so it's good and it's bad. It's good that you're in screening and surveillance, but it's also kind of scary that like the EUS. But also, I always say I was just having this discussion with someone yesterday. That the testing that we use, MRI and EUS, are only as good as, the contrast dyes that adhere to the cancers. And also with an EUS, as far down as they can see, right?
Yeah.
So if there's cancer on the other side that they can't, it's not a 360-degree view when they go down there.
Yeah.
They're seeing what they can see. So it does make it a challenge. And I think that's like the frustrating thing. Like a colonoscopy, clearly they see everything, right? Like doing a colonoscopy. Just to use that as a diagnostic for colon cancer. And where I'm going with this, Mark, is the frustration that we don't have early detection. But I think there are some things, and to use your case here, that are impactful and important for people to understand. Mammograms, right? Mammograms, they can see through the entire breast, or they can, if it's dense breast, they can do ultrasound, to rule everything out. Having, Lynch syndrome, one, knowing that is powerful, and two, being in screening and surveillance. And then I think the other piece, did you ever think, and again, I'll ask questions that are hindsight is 2020, not as an exercise to beat yourself up, but just to think about, knowing that you have Lynch syndrome, I would imagine, and you're going into routine screening and surveillance, you're more kind of heightened awareness of like, hey, like if something's not right, like you said, you started to lose weight, started to have this pain on your side. Did you ever think like, hey, if you didn't know that you had Lynch syndrome, that you would have just kind of like poo-pooed this off as like, just like lifestyle stuff, not necessarily like health related?
Yeah, I think that most people would just say, oh, it's gas, it's whatnot, and it's. I went from I was up around 210, 212 pounds, and had lost like 15 pounds, and that's when my doctor realized maybe we should do some testing. After I was out of the hospital, I was down to 142 pounds, so there was 70 pounds. I couldn't lift a gallon of water. I ended up with physical therapy. Pancreatic cancer is tough, and but you've got to fall back on your family. You've got to fall back on religion if that's what's going to help. And it did. I had a church that was constantly praying for me and checking on me. You need to fall back and ask for help. I think a lot of people don't want anybody to know they have cancer. But then, there's the other side of that. When you do tell them, people are like, ghosting is in a group chat that I'm in, and we talk a lot about ghosting, and it's real. I've seen it. It's, I had people who I thought would be there, and they were scared. So they didn't know what to say. People don't know what to say to you. They're not going to catch it. They just need to be there. So that would be my advice for people who are listening and you know someone who's got pancreatic cancer, any kind of cancer, reach out because your friends really need you.
That was going to be one of my questions, Mark. So you beat me to it,
Yeah.
which is we typically ask. No, but this is a great subject and a very timely topic. What's some of the best things that, your friends or family have done for you during this journey?
Yeah.
And I think you nailed it with, not, and I just wrote it down here, just don't ghost them, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something, we all often here at the foundation get calls from people, or I get emails like, hey, my buddy just got diagnosed. What's the best thing I could do for him? And I'm like,
Yeah.
just reach out and be there. You
Yeah.
don't have to take him to Disney World.
Yeah.
I think everybody but I think like that's just human nature, which is a positive thing. Like people want to help, but then they just don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I think people, not making excuses here, I think some of it's like paralysis.
Oh yeah.
Or that people don't know how to deal with their emotions properly.
Yeah.
And that's where that ghosting comes into.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's and then of course as someone who went through it, someone asks you how you doing, you tell them, oh, I'm doing good. Maybe I'm not, but maybe sometimes you don't want to hear how I really feel. And I would say, we talk about that. I think the one that upsets me the most, but I can't say it upsets me, is I'll see somebody. I do construction, and so I was out of work for 6 months, and I went back to work, and I'd see guys I hadn't seen in a year or two, and they're like, "Holy moly, what happened to you? You on one of those special diets?" After losing 70 pounds, and it was like, you don't want the diet I was on. And then I tell them, they're like, "Oh my God, people die from that." And it's like, yeah, that's the last thing.
Yeah. That's not what I was thinking, but thank you.
And then I try and make light of as much as I can, because the first day I was diagnosed, my nurse practitioner brought me and my wife in and told us that I had pancreatic cancer. She's, whatever you do, don't go home and Google it. And what's the first thing I did? I dropped my wife off and I Googled it. And back in 2021, survival rate was 5%. Now it's almost 13%. So
yeah,
yes, Google MD is sometimes helpful, but it was helpful for me because I did learn a lot of my options. Because at the time it was either going to be the Whipple or the distal. And the surgeon I had wanted to go with the distal, and I would have had to go to Boston for the Whipple. I was able to do everything right in Bangor, so my wife could be here.
It's awesome. So going back to the timeline, after that last chemo, Mark, how has life been? So in terms of treatment, I know we often hear, people going back for scans. There's a thing called scan anxiety.
Yeah.
And I know initially I think it's like 3 months, and then it becomes 6 months, and then some people move to a year. That's all relative depending on, clinician and what the center is doing. But so since 2022, have you been on any treatment? Have any challenges?
I am up to 6 months for scans now. It was every 3 months until December, and everything looks good. I will say the downside of everything that's happened, my diabetes has definitely gotten worse. I have to take insulin now. But as long as I manage it and stop the donuts, stop the things I'm not supposed to eat, and I feel good, and I volunteer once a month, maybe sometimes twice a month at the cancer center. They serve a meal, soup and a sandwich, and I do that, and I enjoy that because I wear a purple iris foundation shirt because my wife and I do the color run with Chris.
Yeah.
And I wear that, and people ask me, they're like, well, what's that? Because it says Purple Iris Foundation Color Run Cancer Survivor. And they're like, well, people die from that. Yes, I know people die from that.
Yeah.
But here I am. Yes, I'm doing good. I feel good. I work full time. I do construction. I'm a volunteer fire chief. I am busy. And
so activity wise, you've been able to stay active,
yeah,
and continue to do what you're doing. This is
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. Like I said, I took the 6 months off of disability. The company I work for brought me back in a part-time position, and I've been with that company for 33 years this week, and they took good care of me. So
that's awesome.
And that, that was another support team. They were checking on me, sending me messages, sending me cards to check on me, and now the volunteer thing. I told them what I want to do, and they're like, just let us know. So like I said, once a month. This month I'm doing it 3 times. So, and
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Because you can see the people who aren't doing well. When if anybody who's been into a cancer center, you see them in the waiting room waiting, and some people don't go well through treatment, and others, like I said, I tried. It's my first day, I was a mess. I cried, and the guy serving lunch saw my fire department shirt, and he knew where I was from. We talked. He came back, sat with me for an hour. We talked about side effects because he was a cancer survivor. And then the nurses were just amazing. That's they know. And one of them was one of my wife's very good friend. And when I was in the waiting room, she came out and called my name. I was like, oh no, I don't want one of my wife's friends treating me. But she treated me like gold. She'll watch this video. She'll love that I mentioned her.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, a couple of questions here for you then. And I always say what we've done here with the podcast is really special because, and not to put words in your mouth, but you mentioned some things like there isn't a book on like how to beat this thing. Yeah. But I think what you just said about being at the cancer center and talking to other people that have gone through similar experiences is powerful. Yeah. And that's the power of this podcast. So these next couple of questions are kind of like along that same vein in terms of, sharing kind of best practices. So my first one for you is, and these are loaded. I use this term a lot, and that's not in a bad way, but they're just they're thought provoking and there's no right or wrong, but they're your answers to it. And those are the best answers. But, for someone maybe that's watching this and they just got diagnosed, what are some of the things that, given your experience, what you did that you would provide as advice?
Ask for help. Ask your family and friends for help. If it's, hey, could you, make me a meal once a week? And when I was getting ready to go through surgery, it was the week after Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving, we got together with my family, and they sent 2 big coolers of food home with me. They had meals that my wife and I could just heat up, and they sent home a bag of DVDs because I told them I was going to bring a DVD player in the hospital because I knew I'd be there for a little while. Didn't expect, month and a half. But so I had movies to watch. So I think if you reach out to your family and friends, let them know what's going on. And, sometimes you don't need to give them all the details, but, just let them know what is going to, that you're going through a procedure and you could use some help. I said I had a couple of really, really good friends who would every other day FaceTime me, just, how are you feeling? We talk about family. My next older brother had a heart transplant in 2016. So when I was in the hospital, he and I would joke back and forth every night when he called me that I was going to beat his record of being in the hospital. He went to Brigham's for his heart transplant, and he was in for 21 days. So on day 21, when I was still in the hospital and knew I wasn't going home, he's like, oh, you're going to beat my record. It's no record that I really want. So it's, you got to fall back on family. And like I said, the little church I go to, there's 15 or 20 of us that go there, and they were constantly checking on me. My pastor was checking on me constantly. So it was good to have people to fall back on.
It's such a powerful message, Mark. And I think, the thing that I always say, because this topic comes up a lot, This is why I love asking these questions, because there's in anything that we do as a society that's successful, I think we've got to repeat those things. And not to say that it's like one size fits all, but like if someone's doing something and having really good success at it,
Yeah.
you got to do that.
Yeah.
So this idea of help, and some people sometimes say, well, you know what? I don't have a big family. I don't have a church. I don't have a job. But,
Yeah.
there's groups out there,
Oh, yeah.
where, there's so many groups,
Yeah.
whether that's like a nonprofit group, it could be a social group.
Yeah.
And the other piece to that too, I think, is that and I don't know if this was, may not have been a challenge for you, but is acceptance. Because I think there's a lot of people that want to help, but
Yeah.
sometimes we see it on our end, like patients don't want the assistance. They
Yeah.
want to kind of try to do everything on their own. So for you, was there like a tipping point, or were you like, once you got diagnosed, like, hey, listen, I know I can't do this alone. Like, we're gonna have to need help. We're gonna have.
Yeah.
Was there a moment like that for you, or were you just like, hey, we're taking help right away?
We, I kept it mostly to family, and then, like I said, that my very first treatment when Leo came and sat with me, I tell everybody that my first day of treatment changed me completely, because I was willing to, and that comes out wrong. I was willing to have somebody sit and talk to me about it, because I really didn't talk to anybody about my treatments. I tell people I was having treatment, but when he came and sat with me, he didn't know me and he was willing to do it. And that's the day I told myself, as soon as I feel good, I'm going to be right there to volunteer. And I have. Like I said, I try and do it. I'm going to pat myself on the back. January, I was nominated as the Volunteer of the Month for Eastern Maine Northern Lights, and I had only been there for like 3 months volunteering. But I love doing it, because as I go into a room and you bring someone to lunch, and I will say to whoever's with them, thank you for being here for them, because you can see the people who are sitting in the room by themselves. They're just very, I can't even think of the word, kind of sulking. And then the others who have somebody there with them, they've got a better outlook on things. So I always make a point to, if someone is there with them, I say, thank you for being here for them, because they need it.
Powerful. My other question here, support system. I know you've mentioned family a lot.
Yeah.
What is that like to have those people in your corner? I know you mentioned your wife a bunch.
Yeah. So it goes back to first day of treatment. Once again, my oldest sister had arranged it so that at every hour, on the hour, one of my brothers and sisters would either call me or send me a text message. So 10 o'clock, she sent me a message. How are you feeling? Did you get a window? And 11 o'clock, one of my brothers sent me a message. How are you feeling? How's treatment? Noontime, another one. So I got home and I'm sitting in my recliner and my sister calls. She says, so how'd it go? I says, it is so funny. Somebody called every hour. She says, well, you're welcome. I was like, oh, this was planned? I didn't, I think I would have noticed that on the hour somebody was calling me. And then on my last day of treatment, I said that two of them came, and my sister sent me a message. She says, oh, what time do you get done with treatment? And I was like, 2:00. She's, well, I'll try and call you. So here it is, 1:45, and she hadn't called me. So I was getting kind of mad that she hadn't called me. And then my wife came back, because my wife would take me to treatment. And then when I'd have lunch, I would take a 2-hour nap. My treatments were 6 hours long. So by the time lunch came, I would take a nap. So my wife would leave. But just before she left, she says, if I was coming north on the interstate, what exit would I take? I was like, why would you be going north on the interstate? She's, no, if I did, I never thought of it. So then she she showed up at like 1:30. And just before they were putting on the chemo pump, you go home with a pump for 48 hours. And she says, oh, by the way, there's some people downstairs waiting for you. So I started crying. And the nurse is trying to hook this pump up. And she says, oh, did I do something wrong? I said, no, I'm just emotional. And at the time, our cancer center didn't have a bell to ring. Radiation had a bell to ring, but the chemo didn't have a bell to ring. So my wife brought party horns, a tiara that had sparkles on it for me to wear. And I did. I tooted that horn all the way down the stairs, and I was
So awesome.
glad to be out of there. But yeah, the chemo pump, that kind of threw me for a loop. I didn't realize I'd be taking chemo home. And then we had to go back to the cancer center, 48 hours later to have it removed.
Removed, yeah.
And then anybody who's gonna is going through this, I would recommend the port. I know a lot of people, I don't want to have something like that. It was, to me, so much easier than an IV in your arm every time you went. And it just made, I think it made their job easier, the nurses to hook us up. But that was one of my notes. I wrote a bunch of notes thinking, okay, what am I going to, and I would say that I had some of the best nurses. And, people say, oh, you went to Eastern Maine and Bangor? And I said, yeah. And I had the best nurses ever. I really did.
Well, I think with care, I think you bring up an important topic. I mean, this is a really, really complex disease. I think in New England, we have really good access to quality care in a lot of places. You mentioned Brigham before, so 2.5 hours north of Portland, or Bangor. You're drivable to Boston. It's a haul, but but I do think though, it's not like you're going to go find someone, you got to go like 9 hours. Like we've had people, that are in, Texas, and they've got an 8-hour, 9-hour trip either to Arizona or to Houston. They're in the middle of the state. They can't get to one of these major cancer centers, and there's not a cancer center near them.
Yeah.
But the other piece to this, so that's one, I think, we're in a very unique space. And there is something to be said. I know statistically they say like if you go to like one of these like big cancer centers, but the other piece to this though is I've met people in person. I mean, they go to some of the best cancer centers in the world, Mark, and they get bad experiences. That doesn't mean that you're going to have a great experience. But something that you just said about your team, the nurses, the doctors, the patients have to buy in, right? Like there has to be buy-in. And if you feel comfortable and you're bought in 100% with that team, that's really powerful. So I always tell patients like, because we have people that, they go to New York, and I'm not going to mention any names, or any major city with a major cancer center, and they go in and they see this world-renowned doctor, and the doctor's a total jerk. And I say, well, leave. Like, go somewhere else. Find someone who's not going to be a jerk, who's going to listen to you and who's going to fight for your life. Because that's what you need. You're in the fight for your life. So, I think, care here in the United States is really unique, and it's constantly changing. It's frustrating because I think there is, as I said, the reason why we do this podcast is there is no book on, hey, this is how you're supposed to get treated, or here are the things you should be thinking about when you're diagnosed. And that's kind of the disruption that we hope to put into the system as patient advocates from people like yourself who have gone through it. So I think your story is awesome and unique, and it's awesome to hear, because many times we hear the opposite, where people have, bad experiences in the system. And so hopefully for those people in Maine, they know that, there's good quality care right there, right locally. My next question, second to last question here. I know we talked about this, the family history piece, but given the family history, the Lynch syndrome, again, another loaded question, but do you ever have looked back, clearly since 22, since you kind of eliminated treatment, and, as you move on this path now, I know, you've got the diabetes that you deal with, and some of the other stuff, but Do you ever look back and think like, man, like if you never knew like that family history, how this outcome would have been?
Yeah, that's. I'm glad I knew, and I'm glad that my provider knew what Lynch syndrome was.
Yeah.
Um, I have a new provider now who I don't think knew everything about Lynch, and she has been looking it up, and we talk more and more about it. But the provider I had before knew what we should be looking for, and she did a great job looking out for me. One of the other things I guess I should mention too is I did get a second opinion. I had already had the surgery, but I really didn't want chemo. I saw what chemo's done to people. My wife is a 17-year breast cancer survivor. I saw what chemo did to her. Um, and I really did not want chemo. I argued, I said, okay, we'll do the radiation first. Maybe we won't have to do it. But then I reached out to Mass General and got a doctor and did a video conference with her. And she saw my records, saw my scans, and told me that everything that we were doing in Bangor was what we need to do. So that made me feel better about things. And I think I would, anybody who's going to go through this or is going through it, it wouldn't hurt to get a second opinion. Mass General has some great, great people. There's a lot of options out there that you can do if you don't want chemo, but I think for me, they called it maintenance chemo. They wanted to make sure that we didn't have anything bad because I know people who've had to have chemo before they even have surgery. So
Yeah.
I was fortunate to have my surgery first to get rid of the cancer, get it out of me. And then I forgot, I did write my notes, and I have one little story I do want to tell you.
Yeah.
So I am a volunteer fire chief. So we have a fire chiefs meeting once a month in the Bangor area. And it seemed in 2022, it seemed like every night that we would have our chiefs meeting, I would have treatment that day. So, and anybody knows going through treatment, you're exhausted. So I would come home, and I didn't realize there was an option to shut your camera off in Zoom. So halfway through the meeting, I fell out of my recliner. I had dozed off and fell out of my recliner. My phone rang. My cell phone buzzed. People would text me. There was guys watching, and they were worried about me. So that's another group of, I call them my family. It's, I've known some of these guys for 30 years firefighting. So they were right there. I guess I got such a kick out of it. And they're like, hey, you can shut your camera off. And I was like, oh, really?
Wow. So awesome. I mean, we, the fire service is really an amazing community, and
Yeah.
we've been blessed. Mark, I know you mentioned before, that you've listened to some podcasts, and we've had some really amazing people come through this organization that have been involved in the career fire service and volunteer.
Yeah.
And, one gentleman in particular who left a very big impact on this organization was a gentleman by the name of Bill DeFord, who was one of our first podcast guests. And is back when we used to do podcasts in person. So that's actually how old the podcast has been. We used to do all these in person, and now everything's done via Zoom.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that what you say, here in terms of groups is just so important. And I think the other thing to that is like who would have thought like a group of fire chiefs would be that group, right? Like sometimes you think like where the strength's going to come from is not the group that the strength would come from, but that's the human spirit in our society. As much as everyone tries to say that we're at odds with each other, I tend to kind of take the opposite, where I think there's a lot of really, really good people in this world that want to help a lot of people.
Yeah.
My last question here, and this is always the last one, it's always loaded. We're going to share where our audience can hopefully connect with you. Maybe there's people in Maine, that love to, and I know you mentioned, we'll give Chris a quick shout out, Chris Parrish, who runs Purple Iris. She's a good friend of mine, and just a wonderful human being who's doing some great things up in Maine.
Yeah.
Check them out. If you're up in Maine and want to get involved in raising awareness, and everything that she's doing up in Maine is just fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, and she's also been a guest on the podcast too, as well. So you guys have that in common as well. But our last question here, and this is always the loaded of loaded questions, but there's no right or wrong. It's your answer to it. Given your experience, how do you define the term pancreatic cancer? What's your definition of it?
Yeah. So watching your podcast, I was like,
You
okay,
knew.
I'm gonna have to pay attention to this question. And it has got to be, and I said it earlier, it's a horrible disease that the options aren't the greatest. You know, the Whipple is not a great thing. My surgery wasn't the greatest thing, but there are options, and there are ways to beat it. And it goes back to people saying, "Oh my gosh, you know, people die from that." Don't say that to your friends. Ask what you can do. Say, "Hey, is there something I can do? You know, want me to take your kid for the day? Let me do this for you." You know, it has got to be something that we all fight to help each other with. It's falling back on family, falling back on your church, your group of friends. Mine was, you know, my doctor always joked with me and gave me a hard time. You know, go to that when you're going through these procedures. You know, someone's sticking you with needles. Go to that happy place. Mine's sitting out on my lawn swing with my dog. And I told my surgeon that, and he says, "There's something wrong with you. It should be sitting on a beach. It should be with your wife." You know, dude, it's sitting with my dog.
Yeah.
And if anybody, you know, when we're at the end, I'll give you my Facebook. If you see my Facebook, you're going to go, "Oh my God," because there are a lot of pictures of my dog. He's got a purple collar. You know, he's
Awesome.
my buddy. And then, you know, the church, my church has done a lot for me. And this week, just the message came through to me, and I want to quote Mother Teresa. And "I am but the pencil of a writing God who writes love letters to the world through people like me and you." You be there for your friends, be there for family. We're in this. We should be in this together. And I think so. That, I guess, my definition for pancreatic cancer and what, you know, defining it would be support each other, because you can get through it. It may be a battle for some, but if you fall back on people, and like you mentioned with Chris with the Purple Iris, there are a lot of groups out there that are willing to help. Here in Maine, we have Man Up to Cancer. It's nationwide. Trevor Maxwell out of Cape Elizabeth has Man Up to Cancer, and I go to a support group once a month on Zoom, and it's nice to talk to other people about the disease, because nobody should go through this alone.
Powerful stuff, Mark, and I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to share. You nailed it, and you know, I hope the audience watching and listening, you know, really takes those words, because I always say there's a kind of an analogy that we use here. You know, if we say it, you know, yeah, it's gonna resonate with some people, but when you say it as the survivor, you've gone through it, you've been that journeyman on this. It's really what's the power in all this, and what we're doing in telling these stories. So for someone who may want to reach out to you, maybe there is someone in Maine or someone, you know, across the country that has a Lynch syndrome and wants to, you know, maybe talk to you about your treatment, and, you know, where's the best place? I know you mentioned Facebook. So is Facebook the place to go? I think you mentioned email before we hit record. So why don't we give that information out?
So email, the easiest one. It's the longest one, but it's the easiest one. mark.wade@easternfiregroup.us. And then
Awesome.
On Facebook, Mark Wade. And you're going to see the picture of my dog. That's the dead giveaway. It's me.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Mark, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to share your journey, and thank you for all you do for the fire service. You guys are needed. It's a big help to a lot of communities. I know for those maybe listening in other parts of the country, not every town, a lot of towns in New England. I mean, here in Connecticut, there's, outside of the big cities, there's very few fire departments that are full-time paid employees. So we rely on volunteers in the town that we're in, and the town I live in. It's 100% volunteer, and I've had just in my neighborhood where I live, I've had two house fires. We just had not too far from our neighborhood. We've had two fires in the like half mile from my house, like two fires in the last like month. It's kind of weird because I'm in a very small town. There's 4,500 people, but we rely heavily on those volunteermen to do what they do. So thank you for supporting and doing all you do in the fire space.
Thank you.
That's a wrap of another episode of the Project Purple podcast. Thank you for listening. If you liked today's episode, feel free to share this episode and make sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Till next time, please be safe, and thanks for watching and listening.